Hey y'all, I'm going to talk about Nigerian civic society, political participation, and their elections. It's just good to kind of recap right now at this point that currently the Nigerian constitution is very similar to the United States Constitution. So a lot of their civil society and election systems will be very similar to the United States. So that could make it easier for you to remember how their systems work. Um, right here we have a picture of people in the street supporting Buhari for the 2015 election. And then right here you have a map, and we know that Nigeria is very much divided um, as a coinciding cleavage between the North and the South, Muslims and Christians, the Hausa, Fulani, and the Igbo. Nope, there's no G. Igbo. Right. Thank you for whoever left that comment. I now know, and I corrected myself. And you can see that the different ethnic groups in the different regions in Nigeria also support different presidential candidates, and we'll get into that. Okay, so civil society, it's very open and free. That a lot of there is a lot of influences on the different government officials. Um, don't forget here at this point the idea of prebendalism and the idea that once you become a part of the government that you will give some kind of kickback to the region or the ethnic group from which you belong. But for the most part, civil society exists and it's centered around ethnic identity and religion. You will have the elite, specifically in cities, more in the South, will have private clubs and professional organizations. There are soldiers and veteran support groups, and there are the presence of non governmental organizations, but the non governmental organizations are really focused on health and education, environmental issues. For example, one being the Civil Society Coalition of Poverty Education. So they have organization in Nigeria. Okay, elections. I'm going to roll into elections, then I will talk about political protest and participation. All right, their presidential election is a direct election. It is a plurality, so it's a first past the post. What makes the Nigerian presidential election unique is that you must win each state. So if you want to be elected president, you're supposed to win at least 25% of each state support. So I just kind of call it the 25% support rule. So if you were to compare that to what happens in the United States, like you wouldn't win a state in the United States unless you could at least, or you wouldn't win the presidential election in the United States unless you could at least pull 25% of that state's vote. So in Virginia, you would have to at least receive, even if you lost the state of Virginia, you would have to at least get 25% of the vote in order to become president. So translate that into Nigeria. The idea is that if you are running for president and you are from the South and you're from a southern state, you have to be popular enough with northern states to at least have received 25% of their vote in order to become president of Nigeria. Even if you don't win over any of those states, you must at least get 25% of the vote. There are lots of irregularities. It is getting better. More than 3% of the votes declared that were cast were considered invalid, and there is lower turnout, approximately 54% turnout. In 2011, Jonathan, so good luck Jonathan right here, he is from the South, Christian, received 53% of the North. Buhari, right here, from the North, Muslim, received 32% of the vote. In 2015, the two gentlemen ran against each other again, and the results were almost flipped. So now Buhari is the president. The Nigerian House does first past the post, single member district. And the Senate is a little bit different than the United States. Each state in Nigeria is allocated 3 senators, and each state is divided into 3 sections, and they'll have a senator that represents each section. It's a very simplistic explanation of the elections. We'll get into, or they'll get, when you read your study guide notes, it'll get into more how the elections work. But like I said, in general, if you understand that the House is first past the post single member district, like our House, that'll help you. Probably the most complicated aspect of their elections is this, that you have to have been popular enough in all of the states to have received 25% of the vote. So you can kind of bridge that coinciding cleavage of differences between the North Muslims and the Southern Christians. They do have their own equivalent of like an FEC, or the Federal Election Commission. They call it the Independent National Election Commission. And just like our Federal Election Commission, it was created to help put legitimacy in the Nigerian election process and try to fight corruption. Except the agency itself, or the commission itself, was viewed as corrupt in 2007, and that it was skewed heavily in favor of one candidates over another set of candidates over another set. The INEC had been reformed, and in 2011, the Goodluck Jonathan election was considered more free and fair. And really, this is the first time in Nigerian history, and this is something that should be celebrated as a step to a more liberal democracy and a less corrupt system. There are things that help make participation easier and make the elections more legitimate. There is same-day registration, so you could register and vote on the same day. Local result verification, so you didn't have to move the ballots so far away. They're like, you could count them in a locality, which doesn't allow for so much transfer, because the more you touch and transfer and move ballots, the more opportunities there are to make them disappear. And cleaning up voter rolls, just meaning that getting rid of people who are no longer eligible to vote. Okay, moving on to protests and demonstrations. More protests grew in 2006, so there was an increase in the number of protests. There was one protest that happened in regards to oil. Now remember, Nigeria is a large oil exporter. So when there's a protest that goes against an oil company or damages a pipeline, that's going to have effects all over the globe. So what had happened was groups organized to attack foreign oil companies. You had rebel gangs that blew up pipelines, disabled pumping states, and kidnapped foreign oil workers. And again, this left companies with instability, and then that meant that oil markets were hurt globally, on a worldwide scale. After 2011, Goodluck Jonathan, even though he seemed pretty popular, protests did erupt in the north because Jonathan was a Christian from the south. He was able to retain the presidency, and many people believed that he kind of overstayed his welcome as a Southerner, and it was time for somebody from the North to become president. Okay. Since 1999, there have been a lot of ethnic-based and religious organizations and demonstrations. They pressure the federal government to make sure that they have equal access to resources. And that's what their main grievances are, is that they feel like one ethnic group or one religious group might be getting more government services or government resources than another. I think prebendalism, that's going to become a problem. Uh, and one thing that is a target for protests and demonstrations are, again, the oil companies. We have in July 2002, there was women who occupied a Chevron Texaco operation because they were demanding jobs and wanted, they were demanding jobs for their families and wanted some kind of access to economic resources, specifically small business loans, so they could start businesses up. And it worked. It ended when officials agreed to help their families out with jobs and give them money to help start businesses. All right, in 2014, there were demonstrations and protests that broke out when Boko Haram had stormed a school, kidnapped over 200 schoolgirls, and claimed basically that girls do not need to go to school and girls did not need an education, according to the Islamic militant group. So Boko Haram took these girls, enslaved them, made them basically into slave brides. Some of the girls have been released kind of slowly but surely, and it's trickled out. Some of them have been released and have had babies with some of the Boko Haram captors. And during this time, from 2014 till today, you will still see pop-ups of protests and demonstrations of the families of these girls who want the Nigerian government to work harder to get these girls back home. All right, so Nigeria, in a very, very brief nutshell. Again, refer to your study guide outline, and of course, when you're in class, we'll go over some of this stuff in a little bit more detail. All right, thanks.